A hostess was pushed into the lake, and everyone laughed until a young millionaire arrived, stunning everyone. The night was alive with laughter and clinking glasses as the elite mingled by the sprawling lake at the grand estate. Strings of twinkling lights reflected off the still water, casting a golden glow on the manicured lawns. Servers dressed in crisp uniforms wove through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Mary moved among them, carrying herself with quiet dignity. Her uniform, a modest black dress with a white apron, contrasted starkly with the shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos of the guests. She adjusted the tray in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly from the weight of the glasses. "Watch it, darling," came a sharp voice from behind her. Mary turned to see Maria, draped in a designer gown. A smug smile on her face, Maria's entourage of equally haughty women stood behind her, their eyes narrowing as they scrutinized Mary from head to toe. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Mary said softly, stepping aside. Vivian stopped, her smile turning cold. "Do you always walk around looking like you belong here? Because you don't." A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Mary bit her lip but said nothing. Moments later, as she leaned forward to offer a glass to another guest, her elbow brushed Vivian's arm. A small splash of champagne landed on Vivian's gown. Maria's gasp was sharp enough to silence the chatter. "Are you blind?" she snapped, staring at the damp spot spreading across the delicate fabric. "I am so sorry," Mary stammered, her face flushing red. She set the tray down and reached for a napkin. Vivian stepped back, her expression turning icy. "Sorry isn't enough," Vivian hissed. "Do you even know how much this gown costs? Of course you don't. You probably can't afford a thread of it." Mary's apology caught in her throat as more guests turned to watch. Murmurs of amusement and disdain rippled through the crowd. "Maybe she needs a lesson in humility," one of Vivian's friends said. Maria's eyes sparkled with malicious glee. "That's a wonderful idea." Before Mary could react, Vivian placed a perfectly manicured hand on her shoulder and shoved her backward. Mary stumbled, her heels catching on the edge of the wooden dock. The world seemed to tilt as she lost her balance and fell into the lake. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, quickly followed by laughter. The water was icy, shocking Mary's senses as she struggled to find her footing. Her dress clung to her like a heavy weight, making it nearly impossible to move. "Maybe next time she'll watch where she's going," Vivian said. Mary surfaced, gasping for air, her vision blurred from a mix of water and tears. The laughter above felt like knives cutting through her pride. She reached for the edge of the dock, her fingers slipping on the wet wood. The sound of an engine interrupted the cruel symphony of amusement. The sleek hum of a luxury car grew louder as headlights swept across the lawn. A silver sports car rolled to a stop in front of the estate. All heads turned, the laughter quieted, replaced by murmurs of recognition. The driver's door opened, and the golden glow of the estate lights gleamed off the shimmering surface of the lake as James stepped onto the scene. His presence commanded attention. The laughter that had filled the air moments before died instantly as heads turned toward the young millionaire. He moved with unhurried grace, his sharp features framed by his suit. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the crowd until they landed on Mary, trembling and drenched. Logan's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening as he stepped closer to the group, his footsteps echoing against the dock. "Who pushed her?" His voice was sharp, his tone calm but laced with authority. A nervous silence followed. The once bold laughter now seemed like a distant memory as the guests avoided his piercing gaze. Maria, sensing the tension, stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Oh, Logan, darling, it was just a little joke," Maria said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "She's fine, really. No harm done." Logan's eyes narrowed, his glare cutting through her facade. "A joke?" he repeated, his voice colder. "Tell me, Maria, how exactly is shoving someone into a freezing lake amusing?" Maria faltered under his scrutiny, her smile wavering. "Well, it wasn't meant to be serious. She's just a hostess." The crowd held their breath as Logan's gaze darkened. "She's a person," he said. "And what you did wasn't a joke. It was humiliation, a display of cruelty disguised as amusement." Is that how you define fun? Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. He climbed down into the lake, the cold water soaking through his trousers as he extended his arms toward Mary. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me help you." Mary hesitated, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. But Logan's steady gaze offered reassurance, and she finally reached for him. With surprising care, he lifted her out of the water, his strong arms steadying her as they climbed back onto the dock. The crowd stood frozen, their stunned expressions betraying their disbelief. The sight of James, the renowned young millionaire, wading into a lake for a hostess was unimaginable. Logan helped Mary sit on a nearby bench, retrieving a towel from a nearby servant. "Here," he said softly, draping it around her shoulders. "This should help." Mary clutched the towel, her lips trembling from both the cold and the overwhelming humiliation she'd just endured. "Thank you," she said. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, he stood and turned back toward the group of guests. The warmth in his gaze disappeared, replaced by a steely determination. "Enjoying yourselves?" Logan asked, his voice carrying an icy edge that sent a shiver through the crowd. No one dared to answer. Even Vivian, who had thrived on attention moments earlier, remained silent. Logan's eyes swept over them, his expression one of barely restrained disdain. "If this is how you entertain yourselves, I'm afraid I've overestimated the character of this company," he said. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. "Vivian," Logan said, his tone pointed, "you owe her an apology." Maria stiffened, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Now," Logan commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Maria turned toward Mary. Her words were stiff and insincere. "I apologize. It was a misunderstanding." Mary nodded faintly but said nothing, her hands clutching the towel tightly. Logan's gaze lingered on Maria for a moment longer before he turned back to Mary. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you inside." As he led Mary toward the estate, murmurs rippled through the crowd, their curiosity and discomfort growing. Logan's protective demeanor toward the hostess was unlike anything they'd expected. Inside, Logan guided Mary toward a warm fire, instructing a servant to bring her a change of clothes. As she sat by the flames, Logan stood nearby, watching her with a mix of concern and something else, something deeper. Mary looked up at him, her voice hesitant. "Why? Why did you help me?" Logan smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "Because I couldn't stand by and do nothing," he replied. Before she could respond, he turned back toward the ballroom, his shoulders squared and his jaw set. As Logan re-entered the room, the murmur ceased, replaced by an expectant silence. He was ready to deliver the declaration that would shake the very foundation of their entitled world. Logan stood at the center of the ballroom, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The soft murmur of conversation had long since died, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. All eyes were on him as he adjusted the cuffs of his suit, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He turned to the crowd, his voice cold and commanding. "What happened tonight is not just unacceptable, it's disgraceful." A ripple of discomfort spread through the guests. Some glanced at Vivian, who stood frozen, her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment. "This isn't just about a thoughtless prank. It's about respect, something many of you seem to have forgotten," Logan continued, his voice growing firmer. Vivian finally found her voice, her tone shaky but defensive. "Logan, it was just a misunderstanding. Surely you're not taking this so seriously." Logan's eyes narrowed, his stare cutting through her. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his tone biting. "Pushing someone into a freezing lake for your own amusement isn't a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate act of cruelty," Maria stammered, her confidence crumbling under his withering gaze. I didn't mean to..." "Enough," Logan said, cutting her off. He turned back to the crowd, his expression unreadable but his voice steady. "You all laughed, you watched as she struggled, and none of you stepped in to help. Do you think that behavior is acceptable? Because I don't." The room fell silent again, the weight of Logan's words hanging heavy in the air. Logan paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on Mary, who stood near the fireplace, still wrapped in the towel he had given her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and unease. "Mary," Logan said, his voice softening, "isn't just a hostess. She's much more than that." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Vivian frowned, her brow furrowed in suspicion. "She is," Logan continued, his voice growing firmer. "It's about respect, something many of you seem to have forgotten." Vivian finally found her voice, her tone shaky but defensive. "Logan, it was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his tone biting. "Pushing someone into a freezing lake for your own. Amusement isn't a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate act of cruelty." Maria stammered, her confidence crumbling under his withering gaze. I didn't mean to." "Enough," Logan said, cutting her off. He turned back to the crowd, his expression unreadable, but his voice steady. "You all laughed, you watched as she struggled, and none of you stepped in to help. Do you think that behavior is acceptable? Because I don't." The room fell silent again, the weight of Logan's words hanging heavy in the air. Logan paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on Mary, who stood near the fireplace, still wrapped in the towel he had given her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and unease. "Mary," Logan said, his voice softening, "isn't just a hostess. She's much more than that." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Vivian frowned, her brow furrowed in suspicion. "She is," Logan continued, his voice firm, "the most important person in my life." The room went utterly still. Logan took a step toward Mary, his gaze locked on hers. "Mary isn't just someone who works here, she's my fiancée." Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Maria's mouth fell open, her face draining of color as the weight of Logan's revelation hit her. The whispers started almost immediately. "Fiancé, did you know? How could he keep this a secret?" Logan ignored the murmurs, his focus entirely on Mary. Mary's eyes widened in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. She could barely process the words she had just heard. "Fence," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I wanted to protect you," he said, "but tonight I realize I can't keep hiding how much you mean to me." Mary felt a whirlwind of emotions, gratitude for his defense, confusion at his sudden declaration, and doubt over his motives. Did he truly love her, or was this all just a reaction to the humiliation she'd faced before she could respond? Maria stepped forward, her voice laced with desperation. "Logan, I had no idea." "If I'd known that's the problem," Vivian, Logan said, cutting her off. His tone was cold and dismissive. "You shouldn't need to know someone's status to treat them with basic decency." Vivian's face burned with humiliation and she stammered, "Please, Logan." "I didn't mean." Logan raised a hand, silencing her. "This isn't just about Mary, it's about character, and tonight you've shown exactly who you are." He turned to address the room. "Let me make this clear. I have no interest in associating with people who can't treat others with respect. Effective immediately, I'm cutting all ties with anyone who condones behavior like this." The room erupted into murmur, several guests exchanging nervous glances. Maria's face twisted with shock and anger. "You can't mean that?" she protested. Logan's gaze was icy. "I assure you I do." With that, he extended a hand to Mary. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get out of here." Mary hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. Together, they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the stunned crowd behind as they stepped into the quiet of the estate sitting room. Mary turned to Logan, her voice trembling. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Why did you tell them I'm your fiancé?" Logan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because it's the truth," he said simply. Mary shook her head, confusion and doubt swirling in her mind. Was it really for me, or was it just to prove a point? Logan's eyes softened, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Let me prove it to you," he said quietly. Mary pulled back slightly, her walls going up. "I need time, Logan. Tonight was a lot." Logan nodded, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know this." I meant every word as Mary walked away. Logan watched her go, determination etched into his features. He wasn't going to let her doubt his feelings, not for long. The soft glow of the fireplace flickered in the quiet room as Mary sat on the edge of the plush armchair, her damp hair still clinging to her face. Across from her, Logan leaned against the mantel, his hands resting on its edge, his usually composed face clouded with concern. The silence between them was heavy. The weight of the evening's events pressing down on both of them. Finally, Mary broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was, being laughed at, treated like I was nothing?" Logan's head dipped slightly, guilt evident in his posture. "Mary, She stood abruptly, cutting him off. "And then you stood there and announced to everyone that I'm your fiancé. Why does save face to make a point?" Her eyes filled with unshed tears as she struggled to contain the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Why did you wait until tonight to say anything? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Logan straightened his gaze, meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "Because I thought I was protecting you," he said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "I thought I could shield you from the scrutiny, the judgment that comes with being tied to someone like me." Mary scoffed, crossing her arms. "And you thought this was better, to let me walk into a situation like that completely unprepared?" Logan took a step closer, his expression softening. "You're right, I was wrong to keep it from you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I only made things harder for you." Mary's lip quivered, her frustration wearing with the small part of her that wanted to believe him. "Do you have any idea how small I felt tonight? How out of place you're standing there, this untouchable millionaire, and I'm just me? How could you not see how much that would hurt?" Logan's shoulders sagged, and he exhaled deeply. "Mary," he began, his voice quiet, "I have never seen you as anything less than extraordinary. Do you want to know the truth?" "The first time I saw you," he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. Mary frowned, her curiosity momentarily overriding her anger. Logan sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "It was months ago at the community center. You were helping those kids paint murals on the wall. You didn't even notice me, but I couldn't take my eyes off you." Her eyes widened. "In surprise, the community center?" He nodded. "I was there as a donor, checking on the project, but you were there because you cared. You had paint in your hair, smudges on your face, and you were laughing like it was the best day of your life." Logan paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew in that moment that you were different. You weren't like the people I usually meet. Shallow, self-absorbed, only interested in what I could give them. You were real, and I knew I had to know you." Mary's breath hitched as his words sank in. "Why didn't you say anything then?" Logan looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because I was a coward. I let my fear of what my family and my world would think of you keep me from being honest. And that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." The room fell silent again, the crackling fire. The only sound. Mary looked down at her hands. Her mind racing, part of her wanted to believe him, to trust. "I don't know if I can do this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. That his feelings were genuine, but the pain of the evening still lingered, and her insecurities whispered doubts she couldn't ignore. Logan's head snapped up, his eyes filled with panic. "Mary, I need time," she interrupted, her tone firm but trembling. "Time to figure out if I can be part of your world, if I can trust you." Logan stood, his hands clenched at his sides. "Mary, please don't walk away." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I need to find that out for myself. Let me prove to you that this isn't just some passing thing. You mean everything to me." With that, she turned and walked toward the door. Logan didn't follow, his feet rooted to the floor as he watched her go, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing in the room. For the first time in years, Logan felt completely helpless. The woman. The sun was setting over Mary's hometown, casting warm hues of orange and pink over the quiet streets. He loved was slipping through his fingers, and all he could do was hope that she would find her way back to him. The local community center was buzzing with activity as volunteers prepared for an annual charity event. Children laughed, seniors chatted, and Mary moved among them with the SE grace, helping wherever she was needed. Though she wore a smile, her mind was elsewhere. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about Logan Mary's heart ache with conflicted feelings. She couldn't forget the way he had stood up for her at the party or the sincerity in his voice during their private conversation, but she also couldn't shake the fear that their worlds were just too different. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke her train of thought. She turned toward the entrance of the community center and froze. Logan was standing there, dressed casually in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. He looked different, vulnerable, almost nervous in his hands. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, their bright colors, a stark contrast to the usual grandeur of his world. The murmurs began almost immediately. "Isn't that James? What's he doing here? Is he here for Mary?" Logan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Mary. His expression softened and he took a deep breath before walking toward her. Mary's heart raced as he approached every step, heightening the tension. When he finally stopped in front of her, the noise around them seemed to fade. "Mary," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this." He glanced around at the gathering crowd, then looked back at her, determination flashing in his eyes. "I made a mistake by hiding my feelings and my life from you. I was scared, not of you, but of losing you, and in trying to protect what we had, I hurt you instead." Mary swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the clipboard she was holding. Logan's voice grew stronger. "You're the most amazing person I've ever met. Your kindness, your strength, the way you care about others, it's changed me in ways I can't even explain. And I can't stand the thought of losing you because of my own stupidity." He held out the bouquet, his hands trembling slightly. "These aren't from some fancy florist. I picked them myself because they reminded me of you, beautiful, natural, and full of life." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd, and Mary felt tears welling in her eyes. Logan took another step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I love you, Mary. I don't care about the differences in our worlds or what anyone else thinks. All I care about is you. Please give me a chance to prove that this is real." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Logan's words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, as Mary searched his eyes for any hint of insincerity. All she saw was love and regret. The silence stretched, and the crowd watched with bated breath, waiting for her response. Finally, Mary spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Logan, you broke my trust, and that's not something I can easily forget." Logan's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Mary took a deep breath, her emotions warring inside her. Then she reached out and took the bouquet from his hands, her fingers brushing against his. A soft smile tugged at her lips. "You picked these yourself?" Logan let out a shaky laugh. "I did. It took me an hour to find ones that weren't weeds." Mary laughed softly, the tension in her shoulders easing. She looked down at the flowers, then back up at him. "I still need time, Logan, but I think we might have a chance." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Logan's face lit up with relief and joy. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give," he said earnestly. As the volunteers resumed their work around them, Mary and Logan stood together, the wildflowers between them a symbol of new beginnings. For the first time in weeks, Mary felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, love was worth the risk. The warm glow of string lights illuminated the small gathering as friends and family filled the backyard of the community center. The atmosphere was simple yet heartfelt, a perfect reflection of the love being celebrated. Mary stood near the archway, decorated with wildflowers, her heart racing as she looked at Logan. He stood a few feet away, dressed in a tailored yet understated suit, his gaze fixed solely on her. Taking a deep breath, Mary stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Logan," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion bubbling inside her, "you've shown me that love isn't just about words or gestures. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. You've proved that to me, and I want to be by your side." Logan's face lit up, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He squeezed her hand gently, his voice thick with emotion. "Mary, you've given me more than I ever deserved. You've shown me the beauty of a life lived with purpose and love, and I promise to never let you down again." Cheers erupted from the crowd as Logan reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple yet elegant ring. He slid it onto Mary's finger, and she smiled, her heart swelling with joy. A month later, the small-town community gathered again, this time for a formal engagement celebration. Logan and Mary stood under the same archway, now surrounded by a sea of familiar, supportive faces. The ceremony was intimate yet meaningful. With heartfelt speeches from Mary's father and Logan's closest friend, instead of opulence, the event radiated warmth and authenticity, just like the couple themselves. As the evening wound down, Logan led Mary onto the dance floor under the canopy of string lights and a sky full of stars. A soft melody played in the background. As he pulled her close, swaying gently to the rhythm. "You know," Mary said, resting her head on his shoulder, "I didn't need you to save me, Logan. I've always been strong enough to stand on my own." Logan chuckled, his voice warm and tender. "I know, Mary. That's what I love most about you, but I'm glad you're letting me stand with you." She smiled, lifting her head to meet his gaze. "I'm glad too. You've made my world so much brighter." Logan leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "And you've given mine meaning," he murmured as they continued to dance, surrounded by their loved ones and the laughter of the community. Mary whispered, "You're the best decision I've ever made." Logan grinned, his heart full. "And you, Mary, are the greatest gift I've ever received." Swelled around them, and in that moment under the stars, nothing else mattered. They had found each other against all odds, and their love was stronger than ever. As the stars shine brightly over Logan and Mary's new chapter, this heartwarming tale reminds us of the power of love, resilience, and the beauty of finding someone who truly sees us for who we are. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and let us know your favorite part in the comments below. For more soul-stirring stories that inspire, fire, and move you, subscribe to Soul Steering Stories channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an emotional tale. Thank you for watching, and remember, love can overcome any challenge when it's real. See you in the next story.